Hi, this is Mrs. Gervasio here with Wednesday's homework. Let's jump right to it.
About the word decimal, you might think about a dot. This dot is called a decimal point, and it separates parts of a whole number from the whole number. These parts are called decimals. A decimal is a number less than 1. Whole numbers, also called units, are greater than or equal to 1. The decimal point basically signifies "and" as a way to separate these two different kinds of numbers. Decimals are found to the right of the decimal point, and units are found to the left. If you want to write out 4 whole units and 12 decimal parts, it would look like this. You can read this as 4.12, or as 4 and 12 1/100ths. The decimal number system is based on preceding powers of 10. This means it's a series of numbers where each number is 10 times bigger or smaller than the last. If we move to the left of the decimal point, each position is 10 times bigger. If we move to the right, each position is 10 times smaller. When we encounter decimals in everyday life, from money to distance to time, we usually only take into account the tenths and hundredths place values. And now you know how to work with decimals.
In this tutorial, we are going to convert decimal values into their fraction equivalents. The first thing you do is look at the number after your decimal. For 0.8, that digit would be 8, and we write that number as our numerator. And for our denominator, we simply write whatever the last place value is after our decimal. If you do not remember what the decimal place values are, there is a way around this. If there is only one digit after your decimal, as in this case, then just simply write 10 on the bottom. And in front of that 0, just write the number 1. So we would say that the 8 is in the tens place. For this number here, 0.15, we write 15 as our numerator. And because we have two numbers after our decimal, we write 2 zeros, and after writing those 2 zeros, we simply stick a 1 in front of those 2 zeros, and we would say that our 15 is in the hundredths place. Now, these two fractions are not expressed in simplest form. In order to express these fractions in simplest form, you must divide the numerator and the denominator by the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor of 8 and 10 is 2. So we must divide the top by 2, and we must divide the bottom by 2 as well. And 8 divided by 2 is equal to 4, and 10 divided by 2 is equal to 5. So we would say that 0.8 or 8/10 expressed as a fraction in simplest terms is 4/5. And the greatest common factor for 15 and 100 is 5. 15 divided by 5 is equal to 3, and 100 divided by 5 is equal to 20. So we would say that 15 hundredths, reduced in simplest form, is 3/20. Now let's convert the decimal value 0.725 as its fraction equivalent in simplest form. The first thing I'm going to do is write 725 as our numerator, and because we have 3 place values after our decimal, I am going to write 3 zeros on the bottom, and after that I'm simply going to stick a 1 in front of those zeros. So we would pronounce this value 0 and 725 thousandths. Now we must express 725 thousandths in simplest form. So what we have to do is start by dividing by a common factor. You may not recognize what the greatest common factor is right away, but that's okay. You can start with any common factor at first and eventually reduce to simplest form. I can recognize that the numerator is divisible by 5 and the denominator is divisible by 5 because the top ends in a 5 and the bottom ends in a 0. So I'm going to start by dividing 725 by 5 and 1000 divided by 5 as well. And 1,000 divided by 5 is equal to 200. And 725 divided by 5 is equal to 145. And we can reduce 145 over 200 even further, and once again, both of these numbers are divisible by 5. So I'm going to divide both the top and the bottom by 5 once again. 200 divided by 5 is equal to 40. And 145 divided by 5 is equal to 29. So now we have the fraction 29 over 40. The only common factor that 29 and 40 share is the number 1. And when the number 1 is the only common factor remaining, you have reduced your fraction into simplest form. So we would say that 725 thousandths expressed as a fraction in simplest form is 29 fortieths.
In this lesson, you will learn that fractions can be shown in decimal form. How? You will convert decimals to fractions and fractions to decimals to the tenths place. You know that fractions can be shown as part of a whole or part of a set and represent a value between 0 and 1. Each one of these fraction models shows the fraction 1/4. You know that when you see the value 2.7 or 2 7/10, the 2 represents how many ones there are, or how many wholes there are if you were talking about a fraction. And the digit to the right of the decimal point stands for part of a whole. That part of the whole stands for the place value of tenths. It's like splitting up the whole into 10 equal parts. Knowing this will help us to write this number another way as a fraction. Let's take a look at the decimal 0.3, or 3/10. Did you hear how that sounded like a fraction? Sometimes you might hear someone say 0.3, and sometimes you might hear 3/10, and you know what? It's the same thing. So here we have 3/10. I bet just by hearing that, you would know how to write it as a fraction. Keep that in your mind as we see what this would look like on a number line. Since there is no number to the left of the decimal point, we have a 0, we do not have a complete whole. So the value right now represents part of a whole, just like a fraction. Our decimal is 3/10, so we would split our number line into 10 equal parts, and 3 sections would be shaded in. So let's shade in those 3 sections to represent the 3/10. 1, 2, 3. 3/10 of our number line is shaded in. This can be written as a fraction. 3 parts are shaded in, so 3 is our numerator. Our denominator is 10, since that's the total number of parts of our whole. Let's look at this another way. Here we have the fraction 7/10. You know that fractions can be shown in decimal form, and you know about place value, so you can turn this fraction into a decimal. There are no complete wholes or ones. We know this because our numerator is less than our denominator, so it's showing us part of a whole. So we would put a 0 since we have no complete wholes. And then we would have our decimal point. Then we would put the number 7 to show 7/10. In this lesson, you learned that fractions can be shown in decimal form by converting from one form to the other.
Okay, and here is the part of the homework that you need to actually bring into class tomorrow. Oh, that's okay. It's not very many problems at all. Write the word form and decimal for the figure below. For each fact, shade a grid to show the part of the population of each country that lives in the cities. So in Jamaica, you need to draw a picture that would show 5 5/10 of the people live in cities. So you would need to draw the picture, the grid of 5/10. And you would need to draw another grid that shows only 11/100 of the population in Uganda live in cities. So you need to draw a grid that would show 11/100. And then which grid shows 14/100? Would that be A, B, C, or D? All right, well, thanks for watching and have a great night.